While sitting quarterback Jayden Daniels another week certainly hurts the Sunday night football hype this weekend, Dan Quinn's transparency confirms that the franchise is rightfully prioritizing the next decade over the next few days. That and more right now on Locked On Commanders.
You are Locked On Commanders, your daily podcast on the Washington Commanders. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
This is Locked On Commanders, part of the Locked On Podcast, now the #1 sports podcast network in the world. I am David Harrison, your guy on the ground covering the Washington Commanders for WUSA 9. Also writing about the Commanders for Commanders on SI, on X at DHarrison82, and here with you 5 days a week. Coming up on today's episode, Dan Quinn's Forged in Fire messaging is the exact emotional rally cry that this team needs, and his admission that he overhauled his own weekly workflow is the most encouraging sign of things to come. But first, while sitting Jayden Daniels for another week hurts the hype of the weekend, it does indeed protect the franchise, and that makes it the right move for the Commanders. All of that coming up on today's episode of Locked On Commanders, a proud part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new customers, you bet just $5, and if that bet wins, you get $300 in bonus bets to use anywhere on the app. Sitting Jayden Daniels for another week is what is most likely for the Washington Commanders. He is not likely to play against the Denver Broncos, and that definitely hurts the Sunday night football hype and buzz last primetime game, most likely anyway, for the Washington Commanders this season. But Dan Quinn's transparency on the fact confirms that this franchise is making decisions for the right reasons, prioritizing the future of the franchise, not just the not the short-term future of the franchise, even though I know some still out there don't want him to even play this year, thinking that that better protects the future of the franchise. So Jayden Daniels, news and information that we got Monday from head coach Dan Quinn, he confirmed that Jayden Daniels is back on the practice field. The Washington Commanders actually had some workouts, had a practice on Monday coming out of the bye week, and Jayden Daniels was able to participate. However, Dan Quinn did also make sure to clarify very clearly that Jayden has not been cleared for contact. So he's been cleared to go back to practice, but he's not been cleared for contact. And of course, being cleared for actual contact is the final hurdle that Jayden Daniels is going to have to clear before returning to play. DQ's transparency on that also led him to say that he is unlikely to play against the Denver Broncos. So not officially ruling him out by any means so far this week. However, you know, as we get back to a regular practice schedule week on Wednesday, we hear from the quarterback after practice, the expected starting quarterback after practice. I suspect we're probably going to hear from Marcus Mariota on Wednesday. Now, Jayden is actually out as we're doing this episode live here on YouTube. Jayden is actually out at Northwest Stadium. The team is handing out some Thanksgiving dinners to the local population. Jayden is actually there as part of that event. He's going to speak to reporters. WUSA 9. We've got a team on ground there. I'll be writing an article based on his comments, and of course, we'll talk about whatever Jayden has to say in upcoming episodes. But the bottom line is, don't expect Jayden on Sunday, even though it's prime time, even though it's the Denver Broncos. It's another opportunity to get like another draft class quarterback, Bo Nix, obviously the starting quarterback for the Denver Broncos, a 2024 rookie, just like Jayden Daniels. All these sexy storylines, you know, Hard Knocks is in the building, starting to film, and all these things. They would love to have some footage of Jayden returning and doing all these things, but those are not what's important to Dan Quinn. Those things are not what's important to the franchise, and certainly should not be important to Jayden Daniels, though we know that Jayden is going to want to compete in any game that he could possibly compete in. Dan Quinn specifically saying, quote, he will be able to return to practice. We had our first session today, but he has not been cleared for contact, so I mean, he'll probably be unlikely to play, but man, it's good to get started and get the return to play going, end quote. So again, just clarifying everything that needed to be clarified. DQ also said he didn't really have a long-term plan on what to do with Jayden Daniels. One of the reasons they didn't put him on IR is they didn't want to solidify what was going to happen down the road before having really all the information on the medicals, and the doctors have just been able to see kind of Jayden's ability to move the elbow, flex the elbow, do all of those things, doing that really well and really kind of ahead of schedule. So DQ also saying, quote, I didn't have a long-term space until you got more spots from the doctors, meaning how's the healing coming? Where is that going to go? The extension and flexion of the elbow, end quote. And those things have been going really, really well. Now, Jayden himself caused a little bit of stir about his upcoming return and potential return to play by going to Instagram. Went to Instagram, posted some photos that are taken of him sitting on the sideline, things like that. But one specific photo from the movie Dark Knight Rises, one of the Batman movies, of a prison where basically, the Batman character has to scale this wall. I don't want to give too much away if you've never seen it, although the movie's been out long enough. If I did give you a spoiler, you can't really blame me. But basically what it boils down to is like there's a light at the end of the tunnel, or like he's going to dig his way out, things like that. So obviously the indication being like he's close to returning, and that obviously sparked a lot of conversation. Dan Quinn was asked about that. John Duran, reporter for WSA 9, asked him about that in our weekly one-on-one with the coach. And DQ said, quote, "Well, one thing we know about him, this is one resilient dude. There's no flinching in Jayden Daniels. He just has that part about him." Also said, quote, "It's very cool to see him in that space, knowing he wants to persevere, punch through to the next space, and he'll do that," end quote. So just a lot of more of what we know about Jayden just kind of being reinforced. And, look, I know we've had the conversation about should he play, will he play, all these kinds of things. It's been the stance here on Locked On Commanders that, if he's healthy, no matter what the record is, he's going to play. He needs to play. He's a second-year quarterback, far from perfect. He's definitely, really good. Obviously, you have all the confidence in the world. He can be the franchise leader for, a decade or more to come. All of these things. I know there's debates on records and all this other crap, but for me, he's still the best quarterback coming out of the 2024 NFL draft class. This year, unfortunately, just haven't been able to see him consistently. Haven't been able to see him consistently healthy, for one. Also haven't been able to see him with his weapons like Terry McLaurin, guys like that, which certainly makes an impact. But Jayden's going to want to play if he can play. The team's going to put him out there, get those reps, get those live reps. Those things absolutely matter. Now, some other players that are getting back to practice or continuing to work their way back from injuries. Terry McLaurin, back on the field. Dan Quinn said that he had high energy. The smile that he had on his face getting back out there onto the practice field was incredibly important. Said, quote, "Yeah, it was good to see him." And the smile lit up. And so too, it wasn't full speed hauling ass today, but that's kind of what we're hoping for progression for Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday. Looks like he and some of his teammates, end quote. So, doors open for Terry McLaurin potentially playing this Sunday against the Denver Broncos. I don't know that I would book it. I don't know that I would go ahead and put him, in your starting lineup. However, there is a possibility there. The Washington Commanders also opened the 21-day window to return off of injured reserve for wide receiver Noah Brown, which honestly kind of surprised me a little bit. I actually went on a local radio show here in the DC area, and I specifically said, I'm not really counting on Noah Brown coming back this season until we have real evidence to do so. Now, while the 21-day window being open for Noah certainly is encouraging, I'm kind of still in that mode where, like, once, we've kind of been through this before. He wasn't coming off IR, but Noah was working his way back from injury. Unfortunately, had a setback. It's nothing against Noah. It's just kind of the history. I'm just going to take the avenue of until, we see him in pads on game day. I'm not really going to be looking for him to come back, to be quite honest with you. Safety Will Harris and defensive end Drake Jackson, they had their windows to return back in Spain. So they're actually 2 weeks into their window already. They don't have to return before the Broncos game because of the timing of it, but they would have to return ahead of the Minnesota Vikings game, or else they would revert to season-ending injured reserve and could not come back at all. I actually do think there's a very good possibility Will Harris and Drake Jackson come back for the Commanders this weekend. I say come back. Drake Jackson hasn't taken a snap for the Commanders because they brought him in knowing that he was dealing with an injury, still having to bring him through his rehab. Will Harris, however, obviously would be making his return, and that would be a big deal. Joe Witt Jr. has gone on record saying that the loss of Will Harris was a little bit understated in the media and the public and all this kind of stuff. We've talked about it here. We've talked to Will Harris himself. So I think that would be a huge boost for the defense. Obviously, getting Terry McLaurin back would be a huge boost for the offense, and Jayden Daniels, if not this week, I think next week against the Minnesota Vikings, you certainly have a realistic opportunity for him to return just in time for a 4-game stretch at the end of the season. Giants, Eagles, Cowboys, Eagles to close out the 2025 regular season. Dan Quinn's admission that he also overhauled his weekly workflow to cure quote-unquote blind spots is the most encouraging sign that not only is this staff looking to compete, but it's looking to get better. And as the 2025 NFL season comes to a close, it's a very promising sign. We'll talk about that more coming up next on today's episode of Locked On Commanders, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And today's episode of Locked On Commanders brought to you in part by FanDuel. The NBA is back, and there's no better place to get in on the action than with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the National Basketball Association. And the best part about FanDuel, well, for me, the best part about FanDuel is the same game parlays. You can take several bets, stack them on top of each other, It increases it decreases your odds of being successful, to be quite honest with you, but it increases the payout, makes it a lot more fun, in my opinion. Every day, as you already know, same game parlays are definitely something that I love. However, another cool thing about FanDuel is even if you miss tip-off, even if you miss the start of the game, let's say you jump in the second quarter and you're like, man, this team has a huge lead over this team. This guy is on fire. I think he's going to end up scoring over, say, 40 points in the game. You can go into FanDuel. You can make live bets mid-game. You don't have to be there for the very beginning. You can even wait till the fourth quarter. And if you think there's a comeback coming, you can put money on that. It just keeps everything exciting, especially when it's not your team playing, or if it is your team playing and you want to add a little bit more juice, you can go ahead and do that. So right now, FanDuel is giving customers $300 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. So head to FanDuel.com, sign up, and play your game with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. Thank you for making Locked On Commanders your first listen or view today and every day, and to the everydayers who come through for every single episode. A special thank you goes out to you for coming through for yet another one. Head coach Dan Quinn also admitted in his conversation with the media coming out of the bye week that he had to overhaul his own weekly workflow to cure some quote-unquote blind spots. And to me, that's the most encouraging sign for this staff, because if your head coach isn't so stubborn to say, look, I've done this before. I've been the head coach and the play caller. I know what I'm doing. Here's how we're going to do it. And we're just going to lock it in and roll forward. No, he's saying, you know what? Let's continue to mold this thing. Let's continue to learn. Let's continue to get better. I think that is a great sign for this organization moving forward, because if the head coach is doing it, every coach below him has no reason to not do it themselves. So Dan Quinn's workflow overhaul, again, admitted that taking over the defensive play calling required him to change his weekly routine. No surprise there, going from being the executive head coach, the guy that oversees all the operations, to being elbow deep instead of just maybe wrist deep like he was before in one phase of the game, specifically is going to cause those types of things. However, he uses bye week to even audit his own schedule from last week and delegate other head coaching duties to avoid those quote unquote blind spots. His message was, quote, "The messaging isn't just me. It is not just my show. It is a collective effort. I want your insights. I want to hear it. I want to discuss it. Hey, what are my blind spots?" End quote. Also said, quote, "So who do I lean on some other spots and even change around some other roles on the staff as opposed to just adding on? How could we maneuver some things around so we can utilize kind of the best of all things?" End quote. And I think that's great. And one, it's a great opportunity for other assistant coaches who maybe don't have those levels of responsibilities normally. They get the opportunity to kind of step up, do some new things, kind of get some new experiences, flex some skills that maybe they weren't able to flex before that. And I think it's just a great move and a great opportunity for Dan Quinn to get better, but also for the other members of the staff to get better. And then, like I said, if you're offensive coordinator Cliff Kingsbury, if you're another, defensive pass game coordinator, whatever you are, you see your head coach continuing to say, let me reevaluate and evaluate my process, what I'm doing right, where maybe I could do better, and how can I get better. You have no reason to do that, not to do that, I should say, as an assistant coach. And then as a player, you see your assistant coach doing that, your position coach is doing that. Again, it's just kind of the trickle-down economics when we talk about culture, right? So the target, what's the point here? Clean up the mechanics of it, right? So what the Washington Commanders really want to attack coming out of the bye week, and it's interesting because I think a lot of teams are going to have this conversation, pre-snap penalties. Those are the fixable mistakes that Dan Quinn says is killing this team, killing this team's momentum wherever they do build it out. And it's funny because since the Washington Commanders are facing the Denver Broncos this weekend, went back and caught Sean Payton, Denver Broncos head coach. I caught his first press conference coming out of their bye week because the Broncos were also on a bye last week. And he mentioned the exact same things, wanting to fix the penalty situation in Denver. So, again, very common thread for all teams, no matter what situation you're in. Obviously, the Broncos are more of a playoff contender, the Washington Commanders, than the Washington Commanders are right now. But both coaches talking about kind of the same things. DQ saying, quote, "I'm talking about eliminating the false starts, the pre-snap penalties that I was kind of referring to earlier, these little things done at a world-class level." And quote, you're talking about discipline, man. So false starts are the biggest culprit for the Washington Commanders this season. That is the biggest thing they've been penalized for all season long. Offensive holding is the second most. So bottom line, both those things have in common what? Usually trenches. Right now, running backs, wide receivers, yeah, they can get called for holding as well. But for the most part, when you have a holding penalty, it's usually coming in the trenches, either a lineman or a tight end lined up in line. Zach Ertz specifically has had a very rough season when it comes to penalties and drops, but that's not the topic of the conversation right now. He's had plenty of false starts. He's had some holds. The offensive line itself, Josh Connerly Jr., I know he's a rookie, so you kind of expect a little bit of these things, but he's leading the team in these penalties. Like, These are the kinds of things that you have to absolutely get cleaned up. When the Washington Commanders traded for Laramie Tunsil, like a big part of the conversation was Laramie Tunsil's, career high, penalties from the year before. We hadn't even asked him about it in his introductory press conference, and he brought it up and said he knows that he had to clean that kind of stuff up. So it's stuff that is absolutely important. It turns, 3rd and 2 into a 3rd and 7, things like that. You have to absolutely get those things cleaned up. And it's a little frustrating at the end of November to still be talking about needing to clean those things up. Really what it boils down to, I think, is just focus, intent, and just taking the snap by snap. So we'll see how the Washington Commanders can do on that. Coming out of the bye, but obviously the defense has been, the biggest culprit of struggles for the Washington Commanders overall. Red zone, when you look at what the Washington Commanders can do, again, a better defensive performance, I felt like, coming out of Spain. Gave up yards between the 20s, absolutely. But once you got into the red zone, that's where the Washington Commanders defense really clamped down, really prevented the Miami Dolphins from doing too much damage and kept the team in the game. That's kind of the area that Dan Quinn wants to continue to build off of from that experience, especially the low red zone. He said, quote, down in the low red zone, that's probably what I was most excited about, honestly, with the team, just, man, like trying to impose your will, end quote. You're talking low red zone, you're talking about 10 yards and in. High red zone, you're talking 11 to 19. And obviously the red zone, 19, inside the 20-yard line, so 19 yards to the goal line is the red zone. Dan Quinn also talked about the turnover problem. That continues to be an issue, of course. Wanting to go out there and get the ball. There's a saying where quote unquote turnovers come in bunches. I actually kind of feel like we've heard Joey Jr. say that before. Dan Quinn kind of pushed back against that notion that almost makes it seem like it's luck based, right? That they come in bunches, almost seems like you're not really getting them. You're more kind of giving or receiving them more than you're going and taking them. So he said that he wants to see his defense do more work towards getting the football. Specifically, talked about Johnny Newton, really likes the disruption. Dan Quinn was asked about, hey, even with Jer'Zhan Payne out, Johnny Newton's snap count didn't really go up. Dan Quinn said it was more game plan related than it is anything Johnny is or isn't doing. But he really loves Johnny Newton's ability to create disruption as a pass rusher. Said, quote, I've not been one to say, oh, they come in bunches and things like that, talking about the turnovers. Like, no, you have to work at it. You got to go get them. And you're not, freebies that you can get, end quote. But he wants his team to go attack the football more, go get the football, go get those takeaways, generate takeaways instead of just waiting to receive them. On Johnny Newton, DQ said, quote, I like that he's been disruptive as a pass rusher, getting upfield to go. I think he's a guy that can cause havoc, end quote. So, look, you don't want to read too much into it, right? But when you're asked about why a guy maybe didn't get as many opportunities to step up when a starter is missing from the game, whether it be injury or suspension like it was for Jer'Zhan, you kind of have to read between the lines, right? Dan Quinn says, hey, I really like what Johnny Newton can do as a pass rusher. I really like the havoc he can create in the backfield, all these things. What is he not talking about? He's not talking about the run defense, right? And I think that's why when you talk about why isn't Johnny Newton getting as many reps on the field, why isn't he getting these opportunities, even though Jer'Zhan Payne is out? I think that's what it boils down to, is being a 3-down interior defensive lineman. You got to be able to help against the run, and you got to be able to help against the pass. We look at the edge, and Johnny Newton's not really responsible for the edge, though we have seen him playing a little bit more DN type alignments here since these other guys have been injured. But you look at guys like, say, Jacob Martin, right? He doesn't really set the edge as well. Doesn't really expect him to be. He's a little bit smaller. He's an outside linebacker more than anything. But you have these guys that they have kind of specific roles, which you go back to when Joe Witt Jr. told us last year, yeah, there's 11 guys on the field for the very first play of the game, but really the defense is going to have more than 11 starters. You're talking 16 to 21 starters. And it just depends on the situation we're in. If we're in a run stopping package, well, you're our primary lineman for run stopping, right? When we're talking about pass defense, you're our primary guy for pass rushing, whatever. So that's why your defense isn't really just 11 guys. It's really so much more than that. And Dan Quinn looking to get those guys moving faster, moving more aggressively towards the ball, but then also continuing to try to get better against the run and on the back end in pass coverage. So Dan Quinn's quote-unquote forge and fire messaging is exactly the emotional rally cry that this team needs to turn what has been a demoralizing season and losing streak into some legitimate growth before the end of the 2025 NFL season. That and more coming up next on today's episode of Locked On Commanders, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Today's show is brought to you by our friends over there at Peloton. Look, folks, it's time to break through the busiest time of the year with a brand new Peloton cross-training Tread Plus that's powered by Peloton IQ. It's Peloton's most elevated technology and equipment yet that gives you real-time guidance, and it gives you endless ways to move, whether you want to work out by yourself or if you want to work out with your favorite instructor, like my personal favorite, Alex Toussaint. He always gets me fired up to tackle the day. And the thing I like about Peloton, it helps me achieve more in less times. They have features that help you plan, stay motivated, track your progress, and Peloton IQ also provides personalized workout plans and recommendations. That's something that I use right now during the busiest time of the year covering the NFL. They plan my workouts for me based on my mood, my vibe, and also my favorite instructors. So make sure you check it out and use it, because it also helps you correct your form in real time, and it maximizes your reps. It counts your reps so that you can do it smarter, safer, and more efficient. Let yourself run, lift, flex, push, and go. Explore the new Peloton cross-training Tread Plus at One Peloton.
Head coach Dan Quinn has a quote-unquote forge and fire message, which I think is exactly the right tone to take with his Washington Commanders team, especially with the losing streak they're riding coming out of the bye, as they look to continue to grow towards the end of the season to get things a little bit more established for a solid platform heading into 2026. Although mathematically, the Washington Commanders have not been eliminated from the playoffs, there actually is, I wrote about this for Commanders on SI, there actually is a scenario here because the San Francisco 49ers won last night, Monday Night Football in Week 12. There actually is a scenario if the 49ers, let's see if I get this right, the 49ers, the Packers, the Bears, and I think the Seahawks, if all four of those teams win this weekend and the Washington Commanders lose, then the Washington Commanders are eliminated mathematically from the playoffs. However, if the Washington Commanders win, obviously none of that other stuff matters, at least not for another week. And then, of course, all four of those teams would have to win. So you're rooting against all four of those teams this season if you still want the Washington Commanders' playoff chances to stay alive heading into the month of December. But Dan Quinn basically talked about the recent struggles of the team as kind of a necessary evil towards building a championship standard. He said they started building the standard of the team last year. Really, this year, they got to build even more on it. And during this kind of stuff. So one of the most popular quotes from Dan Quinn last year was doing hard stuff. He's got a different word other than stuff, but we're not going to say that word on the show. Doing hard stuff with good people. This is that hard stuff that he's talking about. Last year, they went through a little bit of it, 3-game losing streak there in the middle of the season. That was some hard stuff that they had to get through as well. But this is really it. Dan Quinn saying in his conversation with the media, quote, "Show me a team with a strong standard, and I can confidently say they've been through some stuff." Again, Dan Quinn said a different word. We're going to say stuff. And that's kind of where your standards get strengthened and tested and all those good things. End quote. I think it's a really good point, because I think, we've talked about this before when it comes to leadership, right? We talked about this a lot when it came to the previous era before Dan Quinn got here and all this stuff, is that it's easy to lead when everything's going well. Like it takes zero skill to be the leader of a perfect organization. An organization, just everybody does everything right. Everybody does everything perfectly. Nobody gets injured. Nobody's out of place. Nobody's late. Nobody does this. Nobody does that. It's easy. Truthfully, it's easy. And there's another aspect of it. It's easy to soar like an eagle when you're surrounded by chickens, is another saying that kind of comes to mind. Now, I'm not saying that this roster is full of chickens, but what you're really going to find out here, especially in these final 6 games, and especially if/when the Washington Commanders are mathematically eliminated from the playoffs, you're going to find out who's an eagle. You're going to find out who's a chicken. You're going to find out who really is a commander and who just looked like a commander coming into the experience. And that is incredibly valuable information moving forward, because if you're Adam Peters, Dan Quinn, and the Washington Commanders, if you have these honest conversations, like draft position be damned, contract value be damned, at the end of the day, who is going to help this team be successful in 2026? Who is going to hold this team back in 2026 because they gave up in 2025? If you have those honest discussions, and you know who needs to be on this team and who needs to be removed from this team, because then you get into the talent portion of it, right? So I think it's a very good thing for Dan Quinn to kind of acknowledge, like, listen, what's the old cliche? You only lose when you're either winning or you're learning. You're never losing, right? You only lose if you don't win the game and you don't take anything from it. So out of all these losses, the Washington Commanders are only losing, quote unquote. I get it, in reality, they're still losing. But from that analogy, from that cliche, they're only losing if you're not taking lessons from it. If you're not learning who your people are, if you're not learning about yourself, if you're not learning about your organization, then you're going to lose, because you're doomed to repeat these things. It is Thanksgiving week, of course, and it wasn't the last time we're going to talk to Dan Quinn before the end of Thanksgiving, but DQ was kind of giving some little bit of reflection, what he's thankful for here this Thanksgiving season. Said, quote, "Breathe, man, what we wouldn't have given years ago to be in this spot, in this moment of our lives." So I got a lot of gratitude for that and knowing it's a fight right now, but I also, man, in a weird way, I'm thankful for the fight and knowing that you need it, end quote. And I think that's really a great perspective to have. You know what I mean? It's easy in a down season to kind of be like, this sucks and woe is me and all this stuff. But at the end of the day, like for Dan Quinn specifically, like you're an NFL head coach, man. You're one of 32 guys doing this job. If you're on this roster, you're an NFL player. That's worth being thankful for. If you're a fan, like, listen, there are a lot of other countries in this world. I don't want to get too preachy here, but there's a lot of other countries in this world where how good your football team is or isn't doing is not the primary concern for a lot of people. And in America, that is the primary concern for a lot of people. And it just speaks to kind of how good we have it here compared to, again, a lot of other areas. DQ also continued, quote, "It's one of the cool things about being part of a team. Thanksgiving is one of those times, man, coming to our house, coming into this house, coming to that house," end quote, talking about, look, there's some of these players out here, they don't have family nearby. They don't have, a wife or whatever. They're a single player. They might have some friends or whatever, but Thanksgiving, the holidays are a time where they're not allowed to be around their family because they got to practice Thursday. They got to practice Friday. They don't have time to travel home to get that home cooked meal. So hopefully all of you out there, you have that home environment. You have that family environment around you. If not, hopefully you have some friends or some other families that welcome you into their homes. And if you don't have that, you will have me, because we will be here 5 days a week and we will do this. I am thankful for you. I'm thankful for this job, even at 3-8, even on a 6-game losing streak. I'm still thankful for this job, thankful to do what I do, and thankful for you coming through for today's episode. Next time on Locked On Commanders, it's Mailbag Wednesday time. We'll have insiders coming through with all the questions and topics that they and you as Commanders fans want to hear about. If you want to get in on that action, join subtext.com/LockedOnCommanders to submit your questions, submit your topics, but also you get even more information that goes beyond the show and direct access to me as the host of Locked On Commanders. For your next listen, get a double dose of Locked On NFL. Check out what the national media thinks about not just Washington, but the league as a whole. Locked On NFL twice a day, once in the morning, once in the afternoon on YouTube, or wherever you're listening to today's episode. To the everydayers, I see you. I appreciate you every day. And a special thank you, especially for coming through yet again today. To everybody out there, until next time, if you're out and about, please be safe, be kind to one another. And we'll talk again real soon right here on Locked On Commanders, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.